Welcome back to Cheddar's News Wrap. On this Monday, President Donald Trump and Joe Biden have gone back and forth with attacks on a litany of issues, from the pandemic to taxes and much more. Relations with China are certainly among these issues, as both candidates trying to paint one another as either weak on China or too inept to effectively deal when it comes to foreign policy. Join us now to discuss that and more is retired three-star Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, author of the brand new book Battlegrounds, and former national security advisor in the Trump White House. General, really good to have you taking the time. You've certainly identified China as what you call the most crucial challenge facing the United States. But I'm curious from your perspective, General, we've seen President Trump take the fight to Beijing, especially when it comes to issues of trade and commerce. But in what other capacities are we most failing when it comes to this fight against Beijing? Where are we not getting it right?
Yeah. JD, thanks for having me. This is a grave challenge, I think, to all the free world, right? This is because I think the Chinese Communist Party is driven by this combination of fear and ambition. And it's driving the party to extend and tighten their exclusive grip on power internally. This is why you see a campaign of cultural genocide in Xinjiang. You see the extension of the repressive arm of the party into Hong Kong with the national security law. But of concern to us especially should be the more brazen exportation of this authoritarian mercantilist model, that if China succeeds, the world will be less free, less prosperous, and less safe. And we see this from the way they handle COVID-19, the wolf warrior diplomacy, the aggression on the Indian frontier where they're bludgeoning Indian soldiers to death, aggression in the South China Sea, and now just in the last 24 hours, these leaked reports of missiles being marshaled opposite of Taiwan. It's a very dangerous time, I think, because I think the party sees a fleeting window of opportunity to, in Xi Jinping's words, take center stage in the world. So I think what we need is a concerted effort across the free world to counter the various forms of Chinese Communist Party aggression, an aggression that takes the form of co-option, co-opting us in with the lure of profits and access to their lucrative market, but then coercion, where they demand that countries and companies support their foreign policy. I mean, ask the NBA or Marriott about that. And then concealment, by just acting like this is just normal business practices, or to give a speech in which Xi Jinping suddenly becomes an environmentalist, when China's building 70 coal-fired plants a year. So I think it's very important for us to recognize the threat and then to work together across the free world to counter these various forms of aggression.
General, I have a sneaking suspicion on this next question. You're going to be very careful not to criticize the individuals who have done your former job since you've left office, John Bolton, Mr. O'Neill. But where has the Trump administration not gone far enough? You just did a great job highlighting a lot of the concerns that I'd admit we don't frequently hear enough about. But where would you like to see this White House in this moment, election concerns notwithstanding, take the fight to Beijing a little bit more?
Well, I think the first thing we could do is to work more closely with our allies. There's a lot of international cooperation going on, right? You just saw the UK ban Huawei. This is the company that's putting in the fifth generation communications infrastructure. I think France, China, and others, the EU, are waking up to the danger there. We've been working very closely with Japan. But for example, I mean, I don't see how steel and aluminum tariffs, for example, on our allies help us cope with the problem associated with Chinese overproduction and dumping practices and so forth. So I think what we need to do is work together. There are some really important competitions coming up in terms of international data standards and internet privacy standards and protocols as well. And so what I'd like to do is see all of us work together in a concerted manner to convince, you would hope maybe, Chinese Communist Party leadership that these various forms of economic aggression and physical aggression are not going to pay off. And in fact, China can have enough, right? We're not trying to keep China down. We're trying to counter these aggressive policies of the party.
I know you're no longer in the White House, so I would assume there you're not necessarily privy to the intelligence that Mr. O'Neill is now and the president and his advisors. But is TikTok the national security threat that some would make it out to be, since you mentioned Huawei a moment ago?
JD, I would say yes, right? I mean, I think it's important to realize that the party is extracting, stealing, through cyber espionage as much data as they can. I think it's important for Americans, for example, to go back to the 2018 indictments by the United States, I think it's 12 other countries, on APT-10. This is the Chinese Communist Party's hacking arm. And so we shouldn't voluntarily give them our personal data. And I think the question to ask heads of households, families whose teenagers might be using TikTok is, do you really expect the Chinese Communist Party to treat your son or daughter better than they treat their own people? And so I think it's very important not to give the party the access to this data that is going to use to try to dominate the emerging data-driven economy, but also I think to weaponize against us the way they weaponize it against their own people.
I get the sense from you, General, and I've watched virtually all of your interviews, and I've followed your public career for quite some time. I know you're going to hesitate to necessarily dabble in the splashy news of day, the sorts of stuff we fight about on cable news all the time, but we do know through the lens of the election that President Trump is really trying to make the case that Joe Biden fundamentally is going to be weak on China. That's what the election, that's what the campaign wants people to believe. I really want to get your best faith sense. Is a Joe Biden administration inherently more dangerous as it pertains to China-U.S. relations than what we've had the last few years? And is that fair criticism against the former vice president?
Well, I think there's a lot of bipartisan consensus now, JD, that we have to compete against the Chinese Communist Party. And there's no turning the clock back to 2016. I think it was clear to us in 2017, in the beginning of the Trump administration, that the assumption on which previous China policy was based, right? That China, having been welcomed into the international order, would play by the rules, would liberalize its economy as it prospered and liberalize its form of governance. Okay, that's demonstrably false. And so there's no going back on that. What I'm concerned about is that any new administration not trade off the pressure that's on the Chinese Communist Party now for false promises, on global warming or environment. I mean, what the Chinese Communist Party will do is promise everything, deliver nothing, and take full advantage of us. So I think that I think there are really smart people in both parties who understand that. And the reason I wrote this book, JD, the way I did is, this shouldn't be a partisan issue, right? Americans, as we learn about these crucial challenges to our future, should be able to work together in a nonpartisan way, especially, I think, about these foreign policy issues and challenges to future generations.
I'm going to get to your book in just a second, but General, I respectfully got to push you. I just want to clarify here. So there's nothing explicitly in the record from the Obama-Biden White House or for former Vice President Joe Biden that explicitly gives you concerns. Nothing about his record personally, what he said, his public comments that you think could endanger the state of the relationship.
Well, I think that the Obama policy on China was just flat wrong. But I also believe the George W. Bush policy on China was just flat wrong. Remember, it was Bob Zoellick who said, hey, let's hope that they become a responsible stakeholder. Now, that didn't happen. And I think we were too slow to make the adjustment. But I think now that the adjustment is made, I think that regardless of who comes in on January 20th, we'll have to sustain this approach of competing effectively. And this is a free world Chinese Communist Party problem. This is not a U.S. China problem.
Fair enough, and I do want to point here that even, dare I say, the Chuck Schumers of the world have from time to time been known to applaud President Donald Trump for taking this fight to China. You are right to say this is a bipartisan issue. There's bipartisan condemnation of Beijing's practices all over Pennsylvania Avenue. That much you're absolutely correct on. I do want to ask you about this book here now because a lot of former Trump-era officials, including the man who took your job after you, right, John Bolton, Jim Comey, several others, they use their tell-all book opportunities. Let's call it what it is. They want to throw the president under the bus. You are not doing that. Talk to me about why it was so important to you to use your platform, your name, and your visibility to go in a fundamentally different direction than a lot of other people who have written books about their time in the White House.
Well, JD, I'm really concerned about our country. As we are at each other's throats politically, while we see the polarization of our society and the vitriolic partisan discourse, these challenges aren't going away. And I believe that Americans can come together and restore confidence in who we are as a people, confidence in our democratic principles, institutions, and processes, and that we can compete more effectively with a more competent foreign policy. So this, as you mentioned, the book is absolutely nonpartisan, but it's very critical. It's critical of Trump administration policies as well. So what I'm hoping for, if it succeeds, will be that we will discuss these challenges together and then work together to build a better future for generations to come.
General McMaster, I know you've been critical of Russia. I know you've been critical of China. I'm curious from your perspective, based on all of your decades here of public service, who are the other biggest threats in the global space that perhaps we do not discuss frequently enough? Who bothers you out there?
Yeah, I don't think we talk about Pakistan enough, right? Pakistan is in a tough state economically. It is host and it supports a whole range of transnational terrorist organizations, and it has nuclear weapons, and it was the greatest source historically of nuclear proliferation under the AQ-Khan network. I don't think we talk about North Korea enough these days. Remember, Kim Jong-un just last week gave his tearful speech. But his nuclear and missile programs are progressing, and that there might be a really serious situation in the North now associated with COVID-19 and floods and the continued pressure on that economy. How is he going to act out? Iran, I think, is still engaged in a 4-decade-long proxy war against us. What can we expect next as the Islamic Republic comes under more pressure? Massive cyber attacks like those on our financial system previously. I mean, I think there are a number of challenges we're not talking enough about these days. And then, of course, I'm very concerned about this withdrawal from Afghanistan as an end in and of itself that is going to give the Taliban and jihadist terrorists, with whom they overlap, I mean, there is no bold line between the Taliban and these groups, potentially the power again to conduct mass murder attacks against us. There's a massive Taliban offensive going on in Helmand province right now, which would give them access to the narcotics trade, access to revenue that would make them even more dangerous.
That's a fascinating final answer, so I'm very happy I got in that question. Retired 3-star Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, 34 years of active service, sir, including more than a year inside the Trump White House. May I say thank you for your service to this country. Great to have you here on the show. Thanks for taking the time.